Hi there, I'm Jim.
And I'm Claire.
Let's talk teaching. Welcome to Let's Talk Teaching, a podcast from the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology here at Illinois State University. I'm Jim G. Joining me today, once again, our director, Dr. Claire LaMonica. Hi, Claire.
Hi, Jim.
Today, we want to talk about, I think this is the seventh of our 7 principles for good practice in undergraduate education that we've been talking about for the, on and off for the last many episodes. And today, number 7, respect diverse talent and ways of learning. And we didn't save this to the end for any particular reason, but I think it is one that I know as a teacher, I bring a lot of preconceived notions into the classroom whenever I start a semester. And so this is one that I think I really have to think about and kind of remind myself of every semester. So what's it all about?
Well, I think in terms of preconceived notions, there are a couple of things. And one of them is, and this is an assumption that it's easier to hold perhaps early in your career, but we always need to remind ourselves throughout our careers, we need to remind ourselves that our students are not us. Mm-hmm. It's easy to come into our classrooms thinking everybody is going to be just as excited about this topic or discipline as I am. And sadly, that's not always true, particularly when it's not a majors course. Mm-hmm. So there's that, but I think most people are sort of aware of that they think that. Another challenge, or another assumption, which relates directly to this principle, is that there is such a thing as learning styles. And if you ask a faculty member, many faculty members, and you say, what's your learning style? They'll say, oh, I'm an auditory learner. I really need to hear things to be able to learn. Or if you ask a student, students can usually tell you, oh, I'm a visual learner. You lecture too much. I can't learn from you because I learn when I see things. I don't learn when I hear things. There isn't any such thing as a visual learner or an auditory learner.
This is sort of folklore that has been discredited in the research,
especially recently. I mean, there's been a lot of research in recent years, and it is a long time dying off. This is so deeply ingrained in our belief systems that it's really hard to blast it out.
So much so that we were talking about a week ago when we were talking about doing this episode. It is pervasive beyond the academy. I mean, I had my sister said, well, I'm more of a, I don't forget what she said she was, but, and I kind of just smile and say, nah, you're really not. But, that sort of thing. I used to tell people I was a kinesthetic learner,
That's another one. Kinesthetic learner.
Just
need to get up and move around.
It sounded impressive.
Yeah. I need to do things with my hands.
Right.
I need to do things with my hands.
Yeah. Anyway, so these have been widely, we have a human need to kind of categorize things.
Right.
And so I think that these are categories that we've clung to for too long. So why are they not true, though, I guess? What is the truth behind this?
Well, I think the truth behind it is that we all do bring different strengths to our classrooms and to our learning, and different inclinations. So I wanted to take a minute. I don't usually do this, but I wanted to actually read a little paragraph about this principle, and it says, people bring different talents and styles of learning to the college. Brilliant students in the seminar room may be all thumbs in the lab or art studio. Students rich in hands-on experience may not do so well with theory. Students need the opportunity to show their talents and learn in ways that work for them. Then they can be pushed to learn in new ways that do not come easily. So I want to hold that last sentence for a minute because that's a hugely important sentence.
Okay.
But I want to go back to the beginning where it talks about different talents and styles of learning. So the truth is we all learn through all of our senses. We may rely particularly heavily on one particular sense or another, but it's not that we can't, we can't learn if we don't have a given sense. I mean, we can all learn, and it's about learning. We do have, however, we do tend to have different strengths. So while I've kind of finally at last, and it took me a long time to let go of this idea of auditory learners and visual learners and kinesthetic learners, because it was so ingrained in my mind. Something that I like, though, is, and I still like, although there are disagreements even here at CTLT about this, is I like Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences. And I like it because it reminds me that all of my students are smart in some way. I happen to be predisposed to reading and writing. So, lucky me. That's, because that's the way school is that's the way school is predisposed,
Sure.
So, but not all of my students are predisposed in that same way. Some of them are very talented in other ways, spatially, kinesthetically, mathematically, lots of things. And the challenge to me is to help them use their own strengths to do what they need to do, to learn what they need to learn and do what they need to do in my classroom.
I think that's key to what we're talking about here, because whether you agree with Gardner's work or you are going to hang on to visual, audio, all that other stuff, in some ways that framework doesn't matter. It's just recognizing that there are different strengths that students bring to the table, that they have different talents. I guess my next question would be, as I'm beginning a semester or during the course of a semester, how do I identify what those talents are? Or do I not assess the students for those talents, and instead I'm just making sure that the way I've structured the course kind of is good for all time zones, good for all audiences?
You're sort of starting to get to the area of universal design for learning, and that's its own podcast or six.
Sure, right.
But ideally, that's what we want to keep in mind. We want to structure learning experiences in ways that allow students to come at them in various ways, or from various areas of strength or predisposition. Okay, so if you assign students to watch a TED Talk, as part of their homework, then that's good, because TED Talks are closed captioned, and a student who likes to both listen and read at the same time can do that with a TED Talk. If you find a clip on YouTube and you want them to watch that may or may not be, it's I think that it's not going to be closed captioned.
It depends.
It may depend. But it would be great if you could do some captioning. Because then both students who need that, maybe they're dyslexic, or maybe they're visually impaired, or maybe they're hearing impaired. And so some modality isn't going to be accessible to them. But if you present the information in more than one modality, then it's good for everybody. Students can choose to listen to it. They can choose to read the text, the captioning, or they can choose to do both. And something is probably going to work for them.
If there's a student who has an actual documented need,
right,
then there's a mechanism here at the university to help with that as well, to make sure that the videos that you're presenting in class are captioned. And we actually did a recent episode with Jen Bethman over talking about some of that and about accessibility. But more to the point, even students who don't have a documented disability or anything that you would even consider to be a learning challenge like that, it's still better for them to have those multiple. See, you would say modalities, I would say channels, because I come from a communication background. We know communication is more effective when it uses multiple channels. The same message through multiple channels.
Right.
So if you can read it, if you can hear it, if you can see it, different sort of things.
If you can feel it, smell it, and touch it, or
even,
feel it, smell it, and taste it, even better, right?
Exactly.
But that's not usually the case in our classrooms, unless we're in a really particularly wonderful, maybe a horticulture class or a food science class or something. Yeah.
But you can also by coming up with different ways for students to apply that information, which goes into other aspects of active learning and stuff like that. I think that you can that gives you more opportunities to find more different modes with which to work with the same knowledge. Going back to I always knew I was always a note taker in class. I was trained to be a note taker, and we may have talked about Mr. Bell, my 7th grade science teacher.
I don't think I've heard about Mr. Bell.
Mr. Bell, he taught junior high science, so I had him for 2 years, 7th and 8th grade in Washington, Illinois. And the main thing he taught us to do was actually how to take notes, and he taught us a version. It ends up that they were they were like T notes.
Yeah.
Where you put where you take the information. Now he was spoon feeding us. Okay, this goes on the left side of the page, and this goes on the right side of the page. But then after a while, he kind of took the training wheels off, and it was almost a version of Cornell notes, the Cornell note taking system, which again kind of divides the page left and right. But anyway, I used to think that I could not learn if I did not write it down, and that meant that I was somehow that type of a learner. But what it really meant was, no, I'm hearing it and I'm doing something else with it at the same time, and I'm doing a different sort of cognitive workout. I'm actually processing it.
Yeah.
And
you're
that
not
goes
transcribing, you're processing.
Right, which goes to studies nowadays that talk about keyboard usage versus handwritten notes and student achievement and stuff like that. It's not the technology, it's how the technology is being used. What I'm getting at though is that I found that I was doing better in courses where that's how things were taught. Now, fortunately, most courses were taught where someone was speaking and I was writing down notes on what they said. Also, by the way, there were a lot of doodles in the margins too. So, and I don't know what that says, but so it's a matter of structuring. Not everyone's going to learn like I learned. So, what about those students who aren't doing that? How do you get them to do that cognitive work while they're learning? That's another way I think of approaching it. And I'm not sure what the answer is. I think it depends on what you're teaching.
Right. Yes. Well, and yeah, a lot of it depends on what you're teaching, and a lot of it depends on what they're learning. I think on this podcast page, we're going to have a link to a TED Talk that actually addresses that issue, that it's, some kinds of learning require particular attention to some senses or some predispositions or whatever. But yeah, I think the more ways you can make information available to students, the better it is for everybody.
Right.
That's the whole principle behind universal design. The sort of metaphor for universal design is curb cuts. Curb cuts became sort of omnipresent, after the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed, because there was a lot of emphasis on making our towns and cityscapes useful for people who are maybe in wheelchairs. Well, turns out people with strollers love curb cuts.
Right, exactly.
People on roller skates or skateboards, there's a lot.
Or people who just trip over their own feet like me.
Or people who trip over their own feet.
I came out of the movie theater a couple nights ago, and of course I was distracted because I was checking my email on my phone and all that other stuff. And I stepped off the curb into the street, and it was like, oh, I didn't know that was coming. I could have very much used a nice gentle slope.
A nice gentle slope to get down, yeah.
So that's and I think there are a lot of other examples in that too. I mean, when we talk about, and we talked again with Jen about this, about online design and layout, a lot of the things that will certainly benefit someone who has a special need as far as using a website or using online resources that we post in teaching. It actually makes it easier for all of us too.
Right.
Because a lot of it is just making sure that it's well organized and presentable and
easily accessed.
And that there's a flow to it and whatnot. As we talk about so we've been talking about kind of the conceptual level here. Do you have an example of either an assignment or just a general practice that you've used over the years in teaching that you have changed to make it more to respect diverse learners?
Well, I'm sure people get tired of hearing me talking about teaching writing, but that's what I teach, so that's what all my examples come from.
Yeah.
But there was a time when pretty much everything that happened in my writing classes happened in writing, because, it's a writing class.
Sure.
Then I read a really smart book by a former colleague of mine, Patricia Dunn, who was here at Illinois State University in the English department. She's now at SUNY Stony Brook. And it was called Learning Reabled. And she had another book called Talking, Moving, Sketching, or Sketching, Moving, Talking, or something like that. But the point of her work was that we can use students' strengths or preferences to lead them into the kind of work we need them to do, even when that's not a preference. What I did was start giving students choices about, for example, pre-writing. You know what? It's a writing class. At some point, you've got to give me samples of your writing, lots of them. But the way that you start thinking about your topic, that could be anything. You know, you could sit down and play the piano for a while if that helps. It was very interesting. Yesterday I was visiting with the Illinois State Writing Project, which is meeting here on campus, and we were talking about personality type in writing and how Myers-Briggs personality types affect the way you write. And I said, you know, my style of writing is get up and walk around for a long time and, you know, move and come back and sit down and write a paragraph and get up and walk around and come back. And so it's at one point, our assignment was to start writing. And I got up and I walked over to a book table and I picked up a couple of books and I started just sort of reading through the books. And then I went back and I sat down and I started writing. And it was just a perfect example of what I need to do to get into that. Pretty much everybody else in the room, some of them partly because it was the first day and everybody was being pretty obedient, you know,
right? Yeah, sure,
compliant.
Yeah.
But and I, having worked with the Writing Project for many years, felt completely free to do whatever I wanted. So I was comfortable doing that. But everybody else in the room just got out their pens and their pads and
they
started writing.
Yeah.
So I think letting people come at what I need them to do from a lot of different ways and not trying to over-regulate that.
Okay.
And letting them know that there are options for how to get started.
So two things come to mind when I hear that story. One of them is doing something like that. And I think you had mentioned before about how students who were more visually oriented at some point as a pre-writing exercise, you would allow them to sketch.
Sure.
Or
draw.
To draw or something like to
doodle.
But also you weren't going to doodle exactly. But you also were not going to let them turn in like an art portfolio for a writing project.
Right.
So at some point, like you said, the rubber has to meet the proverbial road. But it's a way. So doing what you're doing, it's a way of flipping it around when you have a student come to you and says, I'm not a good writer. I'm not a math person.
Right.
I'm not a computer person or whatever. You can find other ways to kind of ease them into it.
What kind of person are you?
Yeah.
How can we use that?
Yeah. And get them to think about it. And that leads to the other thing, which is the other aspect of the story you just told is that you are very aware and have reflected for a long time on what kind of a learner you are and all of this other stuff. Whereas I don't know if students actually bring that level of awareness. So how do you have to have a conversation with students about finding their learning style in your course, or is that too much?
As a matter of fact, I would not, particularly when we're talking about learning style, I wouldn't. I think you will have students who will tell you, as we talked about earlier, I'm an auditory learner, I'm a visual learner, I'm a kinesthetic learner.
Yeah.
They do know that. That's been out in the schools long enough.
Right. That's a cultural thing.
That's a cultural thing. Yeah. It's out there, and students have identified themselves in those ways. But I think what you can, and I'm not somebody who spends a lot of time, having my students take different kinds of inventories. I mean, in a typical class, I don't do that so much. But I do spend a lot of time talking to students, both in class and outside of class, one-to-one. And when they're stuck, I'll talk to them about, what do you like to do? How do you get started doing that? And see if we can't make a connection between the things that they feel are their strengths, the things that they feel comfortable doing. Is there a way we can utilize that to to push them to do something that's outside their comfort zone. Because
see.
you know what,
Yeah.
if you're not outside your comfort zone, I've said this so many times before, if you're not outside your comfort zone, you're not learning anything.
Mm-hmm.
You're only comfortable when you're in your, you're only comfortable when you're already, you get to sort of roll around in what I already believe and know, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And once you get outside of that, you're not comfortable anymore. So, and that's why I said, we wanted to come back to that last sentence of
Right.
the paragraph, which was, students can be pushed to learn in new ways that do not come easily. Because really, we can't, any of us, always operate from our strengths. We just can't.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at some point, well, I hope my husband's not listening to this. I don't actually balance my checkbook.
Okay.
But, best practice
Yeah.
is
Right.
that you sit down at least once a month and you balance your checkbook, or you
Mhm.
at least go through, you look at the numbers and you make sure that everything makes sense. I don't get to, ideally, I don't get to say, oh, I don't do math at all.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the world I
Right.
live in. At some point, I'm going to have to fill out a spreadsheet. I'm going to have to follow a recipe. I'm going to have to balance my checkbook. I'm going to have to pay my bills. I'm going to have to figure out how much my tank of gas is going to cost
Yeah.
me. I got to do math.
And it's understanding that there are degrees, but there are certain degrees you need to engage in an activity in order to
Right.
just be functional in modern society. So when people say they're not a computer person, that's acceptable. But what that really means to me is, okay, I'm not going to expect you to build a computer for me.
Yeah.
But as far as at least finding information in a computer, that ship's kind of sailed. We're all doing that now. I mean,
Yeah.
you just got a new refrigerator. I bet that refrigerator is more computer than refrigerator.
It probably is.
At least under the hood.
It's, I haven't looked under the hood. It's such a thing of, the hood is so beautiful, but, I'm sure it
Yeah.
is, because it has
Right.
all these little digital numbers and things on the sides of the doors.
Right.
So, it can literally be, my new refrigerator can be programmed.
Right.
And
right.
so, I don't have the luxury of saying I don't do technology.
Exactly.
Also, because, it's in my job title.
Well, there's that part. There's that part of
Oops.
it too. Claire, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you, Jim.
And that's all the time we have for this week's episode of Let's Talk Teaching. You can find out more about our podcast by going to our website at ctlt.illinoisstate.edu. Click on the podcast link in the upper right of the page. For Dr. Claire LaMonica and all of us here at the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology, until we talk again, happy teaching.